human sacrifice, mutilation, torture, and war, all in the name of one or many gods. Religion and brutality have been linked throughout history. Why does the quest for spiritual meaning so often lead to sacred violence? I'm Kara Cooney, an Egyptologist on a worldwide quest. I look at human behavior, both past and present, through the lens of ancient Egypt. And the more I travel the world, the more similarities I see. Exploring why we are who we are often leads me out of Egypt. Temples throughout Egypt tell us a lot about the ancient religion. And although they were built by many rulers over thousands of years to honor many different gods, there's something strikingly similar about all of them. Their walls are covered with terrifying images. Brutal scenes of bloodshed, slaughter, and cruelty. Why were these violent images carved on places of holy worship?
While it may seem uncomfortable to our modern sensibilities, for most of history, there's been a potent and timeless connection between the powers of violence and religion.
At the core of most religions are teachings of generosity, kindness, and peace. But there's also a powerful link between spiritual belief and brutality. Why has humankind always carried out violent acts in the name of their gods? Was it to maintain political power, to impose certain beliefs, or even an attempt to control nature itself? What is the connection between religion and violence? To see how important sacred violence was to ancient Egyptians, we need to go to the west bank of the Nile, the land of the setting sun, the realm of the dead.
This is a place called Medinet Habu, the funerary temple of Ramses III, dating to around 1150 BCE.
Right at the front entrance, there is shocking imagery. A huge depiction of the king crushing the heads of his enemies with a massive stone mace. These violent images, called smiting motifs by Egyptologists, clearly broadcast the power of a ruler. But for the ancient Egyptians, their meaning was far more profound. They believed that inscribing something on a temple wall magically made it real. To them, these images of brutality were offerings to defend the temple and protect the gods. The Egyptians were making an exchange. They were trading the lives of their victims for order and prosperity. The fearsome scenes ensured the sun would rise each morning and the Nile would continue to flow.
Here we're looking at a scene of carnage after a battle.
The carvings show a bloody practice that the ancient Egyptians might have actually performed on the battlefield, and it's pretty gruesome.
They cut off the hands of their enemies and they cut off the phalluses of their enemies, put them into piles and counted them.
They did this to tally the number of enemy dead, but also because they thought that removing the enemy's sexual potency would deny them an existence in the afterlife.
And we actually have a text that tells us Ramses III, as chief priest of this temple space, is accepting this offering of bloody hands, of bloody phalluses, of enemy dead, and he's giving that to the gods of Egypt to make sure that this entire space, this temple space, and all of Egypt is safe, secure, and orderly.
Even though images of brutality can be found on temple walls all over Egypt, there's no evidence to suggest that violent rituals were actually performed.
But there are places in the world where exactly the same connection between violence and religion played a central role.
And where clear evidence does exist of brutal rituals being carried out. On the north coast of Peru, an ancient culture called the Moche flourished from the years 100 to 800. The Moche constructed an imposing religious complex of temples and pyramids that today is an archaeological site called El Brujo. I'm on the top of a massive pyramid where a recent discovery echoes the Egyptian smiting motifs in a chilling way. On this decorated wall at the very top of the pyramid, an image of a Moche god called the Decapitator is strikingly similar to scenes of the Egyptian king killing his enemies. There isn't any direct connection between these two cultures, but images like these suggest a common human belief that violent acts can appease and even strengthen the gods. At the base of the ancient pyramid, the walls are covered with life-size depictions of vanquished enemies, bloody battles, and a death march of captured warriors.
These naked captives are tied by the neck with a rope, are being pulled to sacrifice. The rope is holding their necks, and they seem to be holding on to this rope as well. Imagine them being pulled in procession.
Unfortunately, there's no text alongside these carvings that explains them, as there often is in Egypt. But there's other evidence that human sacrifices were performed at El Brujo. Violent religious rituals enacted in a sacred setting. In 2005, archaeological excavations revealed a gruesome discovery. Victor Hugo Rios is an archaeologist at the site.
You found sacrificial victims in the middle of that courtyard?
En la plaza. Había una niña de más o menos 15 años con un golpe en la cabeza. Había otro hombre adulto seccionado solamente el tronco.
So they cut the old man completely
Sí.
in half.
Y había otras osamentas sueltas solamente de extremidades inferiores.
The El Brujo skeletons make it clear that the Moche employed many different methods of sacrifice. Some victims appear to have had their skulls crushed, and others were decapitated, or even bled to death. Once again, we have an exchange. Religious leaders making offerings of human blood to please their gods. Perhaps these gifts were meant to protect people from the forces of chaos, or to ensure prosperity. Archaeologists can only speculate about the exact reasons because the Moche had no written language. The Maya civilization was also incorporating intense violence into its religion. Hieroglyphs in the Maya city-state of Palenque in southern Mexico reveal a lot more about the reasons for human sacrifice.
Watch your step here.
It's a little steep.
Alonso Mendez, an archaeoastronomer who studies Palenque, shows me images and hieroglyphs that date to the 7th century.
This looks so Egyptian to me. He's holding an enemy by the hair, and he's getting ready to smite him.
This is the classic composition of power and dominance.
And what are these symbols down here?
One really key element is this sprouting skull that we see here. And the skull sprouts leaves.
So all of this new life is coming from the sacrifice.
Exactly. Through death, life also comes. And also, because this facade of this building is facing the west, it's facing the setting sun.
The land of the dead. Same for the Egyptians.
Exactly. Skulls, bones, and seeds are all the same thing, so that the king, as a ruler, has to also harvest prisoners, much like a farmer goes out to the field and harvests his seeds.
The Maya, like the Moche and the Egyptians, saw prosperity as an exchange. valuable human life had to be taken in order for things to prosper and grow. The sacrifices at Palenque would have happened at the tops of pyramids, and possibly also at this sacred building, known as the palace, the house from which the king probably ruled. Throughout this courtyard, hieroglyphs describe images of captive enemy warriors.
It's possible that these warriors were sacrificed during the undedication ceremony in order to inaugurate the building.
So to breathe life into this building, you have to take a life, or many lives.
A house like this, which is a ceremonial house and one that has to channel sort of a living energy, it was necessary to feed that energy. And so this is one of the greatest offerings, really, is human life, our own blood.
So in a way, just like corn, he's food, but food for this temple, food for this space.
Food for the gods.
In the Mayan religion, sacrifice even played a key role in creation. It was believed that the earth itself was born when a god gave his own life for humankind. This first sacrifice was recreated in a ritual sport played in ball courts like this. Through these games, the Maya repaid their debt to the gods in blood. Alonso explains the rules of this symbolic ball game.
It's a fast game, it's a fast-moving game, and probably the object of most of these games was to keep the ball in movement. And this is an interesting...
Kind of like racquetball? Because this is a really small court.
A little bit like Hailai, in a way.
Okay.
Hailai, you're bouncing the ball against the wall. And here it was very much the same. The ball would be bouncing back and forth across this alleyway, and possibly the object was to keep it up onto the wall.
But this was more than a game to the Maya. Evidence shows that at the end of the match, there was human sacrifice. The victims may have been the losers, or perhaps the winners. Either way, an exchange was being made, a sacrificial death for the creation of life.
Most early religions believed in a cosmic battle between order and chaos. The conflicts performed in this ball court were believed to restore order, and violent offerings were thought to be immensely powerful.
Human sacrifice wasn't unique to the Maya or the Moche. For the Aztec civilization, human sacrifice was their last, best hope when the world itself seemed to be ending. In the center of modern-day Mexico City, archaeologists are exploring the ruins of the ancient Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. In the 15th century, this was a sprawling city inhabited by hundreds of thousands of people, with a massive 9-story pyramid known today as Templo Mayor. Tenochtitlan was the center of Aztec politics and religious ritual. And like the Maya, the Aztecs believed that their gods demanded human sacrifice.
The Spanish conquistadors who first encountered the Aztecs tell us that they brought human sacrifice to new heights.
The Aztecs often displayed their sacrificial offerings on something called a skull rack. This ancient sculpture depicts one of these gruesome displays. Archaeologist Jimena Chavez studies the human remains that have been discovered here.
It was made with human skulls, defleshed.
So defleshed human skulls placed on a rack. What kind of a message is that meant to send to the people?
It was a political message, but also a ritual one. They used to think that in the head there was a kind of soul.
How did they get the head?
They decapitated the victims, and because the death was violent, the energy was fear.
So the more violent the death, the more energy you create to give to the gods.
That's right.
The Aztecs believed that in times of crisis, the sacrifice needed to be even more violent. Around the year 1450, Tenochtitlan was gripped by terrible drought and famine, so they resorted to extreme measures.
This sculpture is named Chacmol. And look, it's amazing. This is the original paint.
It's beautiful. And